Let me tell you a truth most people refuse to see. No one is coming to rescue you. No mentor, no friend, no chance encounter. Life doesn't send a fairy godmother when you're struggling. If you wait for someone else to fix your problems, decades can pass and you'll still be standing in the same place. The question is simple. Will you wait or will you rise? The first key point is accepting the hard truth about life, really seeing it, not just hearing it. Most people spend years pretending that life owes them something, that the world will bend to their desires if they're patient enough or polite enough. But the truth is far more liberating than any illusion. I remember a friend of mine, let's call him Aaron. He waited for years for the right opportunity, sending out resumes, hoping someone would notice his potential. He complained about how unfair the world was, how doors were closed, how luck never smiled his way. One day, worn down by frustration, he realized no one was coming to hand him what he wanted. And in that moment, a strange relief washed over him. He understood he had been carrying a backpack full of expectation, and the moment he dropped it, he could finally run. Accepting reality doesn't make life cruel, it makes it honest, and honesty is the soil where true strength grows. Acceptance begins with noticing the small lies we tell ourselves every day. We say, I just need a little help, or things will get better on their own. But these are whispers of avoidance, excuses dressed as hope. I once met a young woman, Maya, who waited for her family to approve her career choice. She wanted to become a chef, but everyone around her insisted on something safe. She lingered in hesitation for months, letting years slip by. One evening, exhausted and alone in her apartment, she looked at the blank notebook where she had sketched recipes and realized that the only person holding her back was herself. She accepted that no external approval would ever come unless she claimed it for herself. That simple acknowledgement, the willingness to see her own role in her stagnation, was the first spark that lit her journey forward. Seeing life as it is also means noticing the patterns we have fallen into, the repetitive cycles that shape our days. So often we get trapped in the comfort of blaming others, imagining that life's unfairness is external rather than internal. I knew a man, Robert, who would complain endlessly about his co-workers, his boss, his city, his commute. Every morning, he told himself it was someone else's fault that he felt stuck. One day, a stranger asked him a question that changed everything. If you were in charge of your life, would you keep living like this? Robert was stunned. No one had put him in this position except himself. The realization didn't shame him, it awakened him. Accepting responsibility, seeing clearly how his actions or inaction contributed to his life, gave him the first taste of empowerment. Acceptance also requires patience with yourself. Facing reality is not a one-time epiphany, it is a process, sometimes slow, sometimes painful. Think of a gardener tending to a stubborn tree. The soil may be rocky, the branches tangled, but with careful, steady effort, growth happens. A high school teacher I once knew, Elena, watched a student, Jamal, fail repeatedly in math. Each time he stumbled, she could see the frustration building in his eyes. But instead of scolding him, she encouraged him to observe his mistakes honestly, without judgment. Over months, Jamal began to recognize where he struggled, where he had skipped steps, where he had assumed shortcuts would work. That patient, unflinching confrontation with reality allowed him to blossom into a student capable of solving problems that once seemed impossible. Acceptance of truth is never instant, but it lays the foundation for transformation. To accept life fully, you must also embrace discomfort. The truths that awaken us often feel heavy, like standing under a cold rain without an umbrella. I met a man named David who had just been let go from a job he thought was secure. At first he panicked, searching for blame, scrambling for answers outside himself. But in the quiet of the first sleepless night, he felt a strange clarity. This was his reality, unvarnished and demanding. He couldn't change what had already happened, but he could change his response. That discomfort became a teacher. guiding him to reassess his skills, his priorities, and his resilience. Life's hard truths aren't punishments, they're mirrors, reflecting what we have ignored, nudging us toward growth. Part of accepting reality is understanding that life will never be perfectly aligned with your expectations. Dreams rarely come neatly packaged. They arrive tangled in setbacks, disguised as detours, or dressed as challenges that seem too heavy to bear. I recall a young athlete, Nia, training for a national championship. She was told she was too small, too slow, too inexperienced. Instead of arguing, she studied the reality of her situation. She noticed where she lagged, what other athletes were doing differently, and how she could adapt. She trained not in denial but in acknowledgement of her circumstances. Acceptance didn't make her dreams smaller. It made her approach smarter, more resilient, and eventually unstoppable. Finally, accepting the hard truth means forgiving yourself for the years spent waiting for rescue. Many carry guilt or shame for not seeing earlier that strength comes from within. A retired firefighter I knew, Marcus, often spoke of his early career. He had hoped for guidance at every turn, waiting for mentors to step in and protect him from mistakes. Looking back, he realized that waiting only slowed him down, but he also recognized that his youthful hope was not weakness, it was human. Forgiving himself allowed him to focus on the present, on the actions he could take now, instead of lingering on what he had missed. Life's hard truths are not punishments, they are invitations to awaken, to stop leaning on illusions, and to finally take the first courageous step toward becoming your own strength. The second key point is taking 100% responsibility for your life, not just in moments of triumph, but in the quiet, unremarkable stretches where no one is watching. Most people live as if life is a river carrying them along, blaming the current when they drift off course. I once knew a man, Leo, who had a dream of opening a bookstore. Every month, he blamed the economy, the landlords, even his friends for not supporting him enough. One evening, after yet another month of inaction, he stared at a dusty bookshelf in his apartment and realized something simple and terrifying. No one else was going to take the first step for him. The river would not bend to his wishes. Only when he acknowledged that his success and failures were entirely his responsibility did he finally begin to act. Taking responsibility often begins with noticing the quiet ways we give our power away. We complain about our bosses, our co-workers, our circumstances, our upbringing, as if these external forces are puppeteers controlling our destiny. I met a young woman, Tasha, who was constantly frustrated with her neighborhood and the opportunities she felt she was denied. She would tell herself, "I just don't have the right environment to succeed." But when she started small, teaching herself coding from free online tutorials, she saw that skill, not surroundings, would determine her future. The realization hit her like a sudden gust of wind. She had been standing in a cage of excuses, and the door had always been unlocked. Responsibility is the key that opens it. Responsibility also demands brutal honesty with ourselves, the kind that makes most people flinch. It's uncomfortable to look at your choices and see where you've been lazy, distracted, or afraid. I knew a man, Robert, who had always blamed his weight gain on genetics and busy work. One morning, after missing the third gym session in a row, he sat in front of the mirror and admitted, for the first time, that he had chosen comfort over discipline. That simple acknowledgement, the refusal to pretend otherwise, shifted something in him. He stopped hoping for miracles and started adjusting his habits, one small decision at a time. Responsibility isn't a burden, it's a mirror showing exactly where your influence begins. Another layer of responsibility is recognizing that waiting for permission is surrender. So many lives are paused, waiting for someone else to say, "Go ahead, try this," or "You're ready." I remember a friend, Elena, who dreamed of writing a novel. She kept asking her teachers, friends, even online communities if it was the right time to start. Every answer was polite, cautious, or non-committal, and she would retreat, waiting for validation. One night, frustrated, she wrote a single line, not knowing if it would matter. That line grew into a page, the page into a chapter, and eventually, the book she had dreamed of for years. The moment she stopped asking for permission, she began owning her life. Responsibility also means embracing mistakes as your own, not someone else's fault. I met a young entrepreneur, Samir, whose first business failed spectacularly. His investors, the market, the economy, all had betrayed him in his mind. But after weeks of reflection, he began analyzing his decisions, his assumptions, the gaps in his preparation. He really said he had mismanaged cash flow, misjudged timing, and underestimated competition. It was painful to admit, but the clarity that came from owning his role allowed him to launch a second business with far greater wisdom. Mistakes only become shackles when we deny our role in them. Taking full responsibility also invites radical self-reliance, a kind of internal freedom few ever experience. It's waking up and knowing that whatever happens today, success or failure, joy or pain, you are the captain. I knew a woman, Laila, who had grown up in a chaotic household, constantly dependent on others for decisions and direction. One day she decided she would make every choice for herself, from small daily routines to major career moves. The first months were terrifying, filled with doubt, but gradually she discovered the quiet, steady strength that comes from being the author of her own path. Every day she made choices, she reinforced the truth, her life was hers and no one else's. Finally, responsibility teaches the delicate art of influence. While we cannot control everything, we can control how we respond, what we create, and the energy we carry. A coach I once worked with told his athletes, "You don't get to choose the storm, but you decide whether to sink or swim." I saw this in a young basketball player named Marcus, who faced constant criticism from his peers. Instead of lashing out or quitting, he analyzed his performance, adjusted his strategies, and trained harder than ever. Over time, his skill and resilience reshaped the environment around him. Taking responsibility doesn't mean controlling the world. It means mastering your part so profoundly that the world has no choice but to respond. The third key point is building your inner armor, the kind of resilience that doesn't just protect you from life's blows, but transforms them into lessons, strength, and unexpected opportunity. Most people mistake strength for physical power, titles, or money, but true strength is the quiet, unshakable conviction that no matter what hits you, you can endure, adapt, and keep moving forward. I once met a man named Daniel who had survived a sudden business collapse. He lost almost everything, yet in the months that followed, he refused to let despair define him. Every morning, he would sit in his empty office, staring at bare shelves, and remind himself that his vision was bigger than his losses. Slowly, that inner dialogue became armor, not loud or flashy, but steady and protective, giving him the courage to rebuild from scratch. Inner armor begins with facing fear without flinching. Fear is a shadow that grows when ignored, but when you name it, stare at it, and move through it, it shrinks to size. I remember a young woman, Rosa, who dreamed of performing on stage but froze every time she imagined the spotlight. Instead of avoiding the stage, she rehearsed in front of her mirror, then in front of a friend, and finally in front of a small audience at a local cafe. Each experience chipped away at her fear, layer by layer, until she realized that the real obstacle had always been her own imagination. Her armor wasn't built overnight. It was forged in the fires of repeated confrontation with what scared her most. Another piece of inner armor is learning to absorb criticism without losing your center. People will judge, dismiss, or misunderstand your efforts, and many let those opinions become chains. I met a young artist named Theo, whose first gallery show was brutally criticized by a respected critic. In the past, he would have shut down, second guessed himself, or abandoned his craft. Instead, he listened, sifted through the feedback, and kept painting. The process was uncomfortable, even painful, but it strengthened his creative core. He learned to filter what mattered, discard what didn't, and remain grounded in his own vision. Armor is not avoidance. It's the capacity to face blows and still stay rooted. Resilience also grows in the quiet, unseen habits we build daily. It is waking up before the world is awake, practicing your craft in silence, and choosing consistency over instant gratification. I once knew a long-distance runner, Aisha, who trained in rain, snow, and blistering heat. She never boasted, never waited for recognition, but each step on those lonely roads reinforced her endurance. Over time, her muscles and mind became one, capable of pushing through exhaustion and pain without panic. Inner armor is built the same way, through repeated small acts that test your limits and train you to rise above discomfort. The mind plays a huge role in this armor. Thoughts can be either cracks or steel plates depending on how you nurture them. I met a retired firefighter, Carl, who had faced traumatic incidents almost daily. He said his most important survival tool wasn't his physical strength or his gear. It was his ability to quiet panic, focus on what could be done, and control his mind. Every memory of chaos, every moment of terror, became a test he passed or failed internally. That internal mastery, that mental calm and air fire was far more protective than any uniform or shield. Real strength starts in the mind before it shows in action. Part of building inner armor is embracing pain as a teacher rather than a punishment. Life will strike hard, and the way forward isn't pretending it doesn't hurt, but understanding that pain carries lessons. I knew a young musician, Naomi, who lost her hearing in one ear. She could have given up her passion, yet she decided to retrain herself, learning to play by feeling vibrations and reading subtle cues in sound. Every note, every struggle became a brick in her fortress, reinforcing a resilience that no setback could shake. Pain, once accepted, stops being a chain and becomes a cornerstone. Finally, inner armor is about loyalty to yourself in moments of isolation. There will be times when everyone else doubts you, criticizes you, or walks away, and the only support you can rely on is your own commitment. I once met a teacher, Jordan, who worked in an underfunded school with minimal resources and constant pressure from administrators. Every day felt impossible, yet he refused to quit. He built his inner armor by finding small victories in the lives he touched, by reminding himself why he started, and by holding steady when the world seemed to crumble around him. True resilience is not loud or celebrated. It is the quiet certainty that no matter the storm, you will stand, and in standing, you become unbreakable. The fourth key point is learning to stand alone, to find your balance and strength without relying on anyone else to hold you up. So much of life teaches us to seek approval, to look outward for validation, as if our worth depends on the recognition of others. I once knew a young man, Ethan, who measured every success by the applause he received. When it came, he felt unstoppable. When it faded, he felt empty. One evening, sitting alone on a park bench after yet another overlooked achievement, he realized the applause wasn't his to depend on. It was fleeting and unreliable. In that quiet moment, he began to cultivate an internal source of validation, learning to trust his own judgment and to honor his own efforts. The realization was liberating. Strength started to rise from within. Standing alone begins with solitude, not loneliness. It's in the silence that we hear the whispers of our own potential, the subtle hints of what we are capable of if we stop seeking external permission. I met a woman named Clara who had always surrounded herself with friends who constantly influenced her choices. When she moved to a new city for work, she had no familiar faces, no one to lean on, and initially she panicked. But over months, She began to discover the richness of her own thoughts, the clarity in making decisions without compromise. In that solitude, she found confidence and clarity she had never experienced when guided by the expectations of others. Standing alone also means embracing discomfort with grace. Independence is rarely comfortable at first. It forces you to confront your fears, insecurities, and limitations. I remember a man, Miguel, who decided to leave a safe, predictable job to start a small cafe on his own. Friends doubted him, family worried, and he faced endless logistical nightmares. In the early days, he felt overwhelmed, questioning his choice every hour. But gradually he began to rely on his own resourcefulness, creativity, and perseverance. The discomfort became a teacher, revealing his resilience, sharpening his problem solving, and showing him that he didn't need constant reassurance to succeed. Another layer of standing alone is the ability to celebrate your own victories, however small. So often, we wait for others to acknowledge our efforts, to say well done, before we allow ourselves to feel pride. I knew a young dancer, Sienna, who performed in tiny recitals with barely anyone in the audience. At first, she felt discouraged and undervalued. But she decided to honor her own dedication, recognizing that each step she took, each movement perfected, was meaningful, regardless of who watched. That choice transformed her relationship with her craft. Independence doesn't mean isolation, it means learning to measure your worth by your own standards, and in doing so, finding an unshakable joy. Standing alone also demands the courage to trust your instincts when the crowd moves in a different direction. Peer pressure and societal expectations are subtle, persistent forces that can drown out your own voice. I remember a software engineer, Tariq, who wanted to pursue a creative side project instead of the high-paying corporate path everyone around him was celebrating. For months, he hesitated, fearing judgment and failure. One night, he decided to trust his own intuition and dedicate himself to his project. The work was slow, challenging, and sometimes lonely, but the satisfaction of creating something truly his own was unmatched. Trusting yourself, even when it means standing apart, strengthens your sense of purpose. A key part of standing alone is learning to hold your boundaries without apology. People will test you, push you, and expect you to conform to their comfort. I met a teacher, Naomi, who worked in a school where colleagues frequently demanded her time and energy beyond reason. Initially, she gave in, fearing conflict and rejection. Over time, she learned to say no, not out of defiance, but out of respect for her own limits and priorities. That simple act of standing firm, even when unpopular, became a cornerstone of her self-respect and inner authority. Independence is not defiance. It is self-respect made visible. Finally, standing alone allows you to fully embrace your growth without the distraction of comparison. When you stop measuring yourself against others, you begin to notice the subtle, steady progress that is uniquely yours. I knew a young writer, Leo, who constantly compared himself to best-selling authors, feeling inadequate and frustrated. One day, he stopped looking outward and focused solely on his own craft, tracking his daily improvement in writing and storytelling. That shift transformed his confidence, giving him a quiet assurance that the value of his work was independent of others' recognition. Learning to stand alone is learning to walk forward step by step, guided by your own light. The fifth key point is training your mind daily, shaping it like a sculptor shapes clay, not waiting for inspiration or motivation to strike, but consistently, patiently, and deliberately molding it into a tool of clarity and power. Most people treat their minds like a passenger seat, letting every passing thought, distraction, or emotion steer their direction. I knew a young man, Jordan, who would wake up each morning, and immediately scroll through social media, letting other people's lives, opinions, and achievements set the tone for his day. After months of frustration and stagnation, he decided to take control. He started 15 minutes each morning reflecting, writing, and planning his thoughts. Slowly, that small daily practice began to shift how he saw problems, how he made decisions, and how he acted. His mind, once chaotic, became a quiet, reliable engine for his life. Training your mind is about noticing what you feed it and how you feed it. Just as a gardener cannot grow roses in poor soil, a mind cannot flourish on random noise and fleeting entertainment. I once met a woman named Sophia, a nurse working long hours. She was exhausted at the end of every day, but she realized that her mental exhaustion wasn't just from work, it was from letting worry, fear, and negativity accumulate unchecked. She began dedicating 10 minutes before bed to reflect on one positive action she took, one challenge she overcame, and one lesson she learned. Those small deposits of reflection transformed her perception. Over time, she found herself calmer, more focused, and more capable of handling crises with clear judgment. Another dimension of mental training is learning to challenge your thoughts instead of accepting them blindly. Thoughts are like currents in a river. Left unchecked, they can sweep you into despair or indecision. I knew a man named Ravi who constantly told himself he wasn't capable of leadership. He believed he was too young, too inexperienced, too ordinary. One day, during a particularly stressful meeting, he paused and asked himself, "Is this true, or am I just repeating what I've always believed?" That simple question disrupted the automatic negative loop. He began actively questioning self-doubt, separating facts from assumptions, and gradually he found courage he never knew existed. Training the mind means learning to recognize the currents and then learning to swim with control rather than being swept away. Discipline is the foundation of mental strength. I met a retired Army officer, Major Whitman, who said that his greatest asset wasn't physical endurance or tactical knowledge. It was the habit of daily mental drills. Every day he would read, write, and visualize scenarios that challenged his thinking, even after decades of service. His mind became a muscle that could flex under pressure, adapt to uncertainty, and make decisions in the chaos of battle. In civilian life, we face different battles, but the principle is the same. Consistent, deliberate practice sharpens focus, strengthens resolve, and turns the mind into a tool that can carry you through any storm. Another key aspect of mental training is learning to control what you dwell on. Most people allow their minds to ruminate on past mistakes, anxieties about the future, or comparisons with others. I knew a woman named Anya who had been passed over for a promotion and spent weeks replaying the rejection in her mind. One morning, she decided to redirect her thoughts, asking herself what she could learn, what she could do differently, and what opportunities were still available. The shift didn't happen overnight, but over time, she discovered that she had more energy, more clarity, and more initiative when she consciously chose where her mind went. Training the mind is about steering attention, not letting it drift aimlessly. Visualization and imagination are also part of strengthening the mind. I remember a young musician, Leo, who wanted to perform at a prestigious concert hall but felt overwhelmed by the competition. Each night, he would close his eyes and imagine himself on stage, feeling the floor under his feet, hearing the applause, seeing every note land perfectly. At first, it felt like daydreaming, but over months, the practice rewired his confidence, focus, and emotional control. The mind began to prepare his body and emotions before reality caught up. Mental training is not just thinking, it is rehearsing life in a way that equips you for the challenges that come. Finally, training your mind daily is about cultivating a relationship with yourself that is both kind and rigorous. You observe your thoughts, test them, and guide them, but without cruelty or judgment. I knew a young teacher, Marcus, who struggled with anxiety. Each morning, he would spend a few minutes acknowledging his worries then deliberately refocusing on what he could influence and control. Over time, his internal dialogue became supportive yet disciplined, a voice that pushed him toward action while grounding him in clarity. The mind, like a garden, thrives under attention, care, and steady effort. Every day you train it, you strengthen the foundation for a life that is deliberate, focused, and unstoppable. The sixth key point is acting without waiting, stepping into life even when the perfect moment seems impossible to find. Most people delay action, convincing themselves that timing, preparation, or circumstances must align before they can move. I once knew a young woman, Mara, who dreamed of starting a small bakery. She waited for the right kitchen, the perfect recipe, the ideal investment. Years passed, and each day she felt more like a spectator in her own life. One morning, tired of watching, she borrowed an old stove, baked a few dozen loaves, and sold them to neighbors. That small, imperfect action created momentum she had never imagined. Action doesn't require perfection, it requires courage to begin. Action starts with breaking down the illusion of control. People often wait for guarantees, for certainty, as if life will pause until they feel ready. I met a man, Victor, who wanted to launch a community project to help underprivileged youth. He spent months drafting the perfect plan, worried about funding, approval, and timing. One rainy evening, he decided to visit the local community center anyway, talking to a few kids, volunteering his time without any structure. The project didn't fail or succeed overnight. It evolved because he acted. The lesson he learned was simple but profound. Clarity emerges through motion, not hesitation. Acting without waiting also means embracing imperfection as the engine of growth. Waiting for all conditions to be ideal is a trap disguised as prudence. I once knew a writer, Simone, who delayed submitting her first novel for years because she feared criticism. One afternoon, on a whim, she sent the manuscript to a small publisher. It was not perfect, but it was real. The feedback she received was invaluable, teaching her more than years of preparation ever could. Momentum comes from doing, not planning, and each step forward creates a path that was invisible while standing still. Another facet of action is choosing progress over comfort. It's tempting to linger in routines, familiar roles, or predictable environments because they feel safe. I knew a man named Alex who had dreamed of moving to another city to work in a field he loved. He hesitated for years, citing rent, friendships, and stability as reasons to stay. Eventually, he rented a small apartment in the new city and began working in a modest position, far from the ideal job he imagined. Every day he built experience, connections, and confidence. Action often demands leaving comfort behind, but each step creates an ecosystem of possibility. Acting without waiting also means learning from feedback in real time, rather than waiting for someone else to approve your next move. I met a young designer, Leila, who had hundreds of sketches but never showed them, fearing judgment. One day she posted a few online, expecting criticism, and instead received encouragement, constructive critique, and collaboration offers. The moment she acted, the world responded, revealing opportunities that waiting had hidden. Action is a dialogue between effort and reality. And the sooner it begins, the sooner you learn, adapt, and grow. Action requires embracing risk, even when fear feels overwhelming. I once knew a retired firefighter, Mark, who shared a story from early in his career. He had to lead a team into a burning building without knowing exactly what awaited them. Hesitation could have cost lives, but he acted decisively, using the skills he had while learning as he moved. Life rarely presents certainty, but courage in action creates experience, confidence, and the ability to navigate uncertainty. Waiting for guarantees is a silent foe. RM of surrender, acting in spite of fear, is the birthplace of mastery. Finally, acting without waiting is about understanding that momentum compounds. A single step often seems small, almost meaningless, but it creates energy that propels you forward. I knew a young musician, Arya, who spent years learning guitar in her bedroom, waiting for inspiration or permission to perform publicly. One evening, she played at a tiny local cafe for a handful of strangers. That step led to more gigs, more confidence, and eventually recognition she had only dreamed of. Action is the bridge between possibility and reality, and the first step is always the hardest yet most transformative. The seventh key point is becoming the hero of your own story. Realizing that your life is not a series of random events, but a narrative in which you are both the protagonist and the author. Too many people live as if someone else holds the pen, waiting for mentors, luck, or circumstance to guide the plot. I once met a man named Julian who had spent years drifting through jobs he didn't care about, blaming the economy, his education, and other people for his stagnation. One night, sitting alone in his small apartment, he imagined his life as a storybook. He asked himself a simple question: am I a character who waits or a hero who acts? That moment ignited a shift. He began taking ownership of the plot, making choices that aligned with his vision instead of waiting for it to appear magically. Being the hero requires courage in moments of uncertainty. Life rarely hands you clarity. Often, you must move forward with only fragments of information and a pounding heart. I remember a young woman, Naomi, who intended to launch a non-profit to serve her community but lacked experience, resources, and connections. Friends warned her of the risk, and she felt the familiar pull of doubt. Yet she acted anyway, writing letters, pitching small initiatives, and volunteering tirelessly. Each small act was a scene in her story where courage triumphed over fear, and slowly her non-profit began to take shape. The hero's journey is rarely glamorous at first. It's built in small, bold choices made despite uncertainty. To be your own hero, you must also embrace the responsibility of the consequences of your choices. Heroes are not defined by their victories alone, but by the way they confront setbacks, failures, and mistakes. I knew a man named Malik who invested years into a startup that ultimately failed. Many would have blamed investors, the market, or timing. Instead, he dissected each decision, owning both the successes and the missteps. That ownership was transformative. It allowed him to launch a new venture with insight and confidence that failure alone could not teach. Being the hero means claiming not just your victories, but also the lessons hidden within your losses. Part of becoming the hero is developing vision, seeing not just what is, but what could be. I met a teacher, Leila, who worked in a school with little funding, outdated textbooks, and endless bureaucracy. Most of her colleagues focused on what couldn't be done, but she imagined what could be possible: programs that inspired curiosity, mentoring initiatives, and small changes that would ripple into lifelong impact. Her vision became the compass for her decisions and actions. Heroes don't wait for the world to change, they imagine the world they want to create and step into it, crafting their path one intentional choice at a time. Heroes also learn the quiet power of persistence. They show up when it would be easier to give up, when the audience is small, or when progress feels invisible. I knew a musician, Elias, who spent years performing in empty bars, practicing in solitude, and facing rejection after rejection. Every night he returned to the stage, even when the applause was absent. Each performance honed his skill, strengthened his patience, and built an inner confidence that no sudden fame could replicate. Persistence is the hero's steady heartbeat, carrying them through chapters that seem endless or thankless, but ultimately essential to the arc of their story. Another defining trait of the hero is the ability to inspire others, not because they seek admiration, but because their courage and clarity naturally influence those around them. I met a young activist, Maya, who began organizing small community cleanups. At first, only a handful of volunteers joined her, yet her dedication, transparency, and unwavering commitment gradually drew more people in. Her story didn't just change her life, it changed the lives of dozens around her. Heroes create impact by embodying the principles they champion, not by preaching them, and in doing so, they write scenes of influence into the lives of others. Finally, becoming the hero of your story is about owning your legacy in the smallest moments, not just the grand ones. A retired firefighter, Marcus, once told me that heroism isn't measured only in dramatic rescues, but in the consistency of showing up, making choices that align with values, and are refusing to surrender to despair. Every small act, helping a neighbor, mentoring a friend, making a tough decision, or resisting the easy compromise, becomes a line in your story. Your life, fully claimed, fully owned, becomes a narrative of courage, clarity, and impact. The hero isn't someone waiting to arrive. The hero is you, fully present, fully responsible, fully alive in every chapter you write. And now, take a moment and let all of this settle. Not as advice, not as a lecture, but as a quiet truth you carry inside yourself. Life will continue exactly as it has, with its unpredictability, its pressures, and its moments of discomfort. There is no promise of rescue, no guarantee that the path will be smooth or clear. But there is something far more certain, the strength that already exists within you, waiting to be claimed. Every choice, every thought, every small action you take becomes part of the structure that holds you upright when the world pushes hard against you. You've seen the patterns, faced the doubts, felt the fear, and yet you are still here. That alone is proof of your resilience. The moments when you believed you might crumble were not signs of weakness. They were invitations to discover how much steadiness you already possess. Life will continue to test you, but the tests are no longer obstacles in the way, they are mirrors, reflecting the power you have when you stop waiting for someone else to intervene. Your own mind, your own courage, and your own choices are enough. The quiet truth is that strength is not loud or visible. It is a steady presence beneath the surface. The calm in your chest when chaos surrounds you. The clarity in your thoughts when confusion tempts you. It is built one deliberate day at a time through acts of persistence, reflection, and courage. And each time you honor it, it grows. It does not depend on recognition, applause, or permission. It simply is ready to guide you forward. Remember, your life is yours to navigate. No one else can experience your struggles, make your decisions, or walk your path for you. The responsibility you carry is not a burden, it is the defining feature of your freedom. When you accept it fully, when you stop hoping for rescue and start relying on your own capacity, you step into a steadiness that the world cannot shake. You begin to move with intention rather than reaction, with clarity rather than uncertainty. And in that steadiness, you will notice something profound. The noise around you, the opinions, the doubts, the fears lose their weight. What matters is no longer the expectation of others, but the alignment between your actions and your own sense of purpose. That alignment is quiet, but it is firm. It carries with it a sense of calm confidence, a conviction that comes from knowing you are capable, resourceful, and fully alive in your own story. So walk forward carrying that clarity with you. Walk forward with the knowledge that the world is unpredictable, but your mind, your choices, and your inner strength are constants you can rely on. Even on the hardest days, even when progress seems invisible, you have the capacity to respond with steadiness, insight, and courage. That is the truest form of power, quiet, resilient, and entirely your own. And in the stillness of your own presence, when the noise fades and the distractions settle, you will feel it, a ground, edge certainty that no matter what comes next, you are enough. You have always been enough. The life ahead is yours to navigate. And now, more than ever, you are ready to move through it with clarity, strength, and quiet determination.